Made with Spoken. Crescent Chronicles 18. The Plague Child. Prologue. By Franetta McMillian. Digital narration, performed by Narrator's Custom Voice 3. The Plague Child. Prologue. Miss Etta Flowers. Crescent Region, Dome East, Flowers Estate. Hey, Uncle Lillian, I said as I opened the door. Thank you so much for coming. I know it's late, and I know you're only back in region for a short while, and this really isn't your area of expertise, but I didn't know what else to do. Lillian Ruby stood in my doorway looking dazed and wild, fully geared up in an official Ruby Biotech has-suit, clutching his helmet in his right hand. He just returned from a business trip to China Dome, and had barely unpacked when I phoned him with my emergency. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hair was full of static and sticking out in a spiky halo. No problem, he said, even though it clearly was. What's the matter, Etta? Is something wrong with the baby? No, Alicia's fine, thank God. I think she's sleeping now. It's Allison. He frowned slightly, then crossed the threshold and sat on the mudroom bench to remove his boots. Then he paused a bit to center himself and try to rub the jet lag from his eyes. What's up with Allison? He asked. I took a pause of my own. So far it had been one hell of a day. Allison and I had fought almost since the day she was born, but never like this. I was hoarse from all the yelling and choking back tears. It's like she just doesn't care anymore. She mostly sits in bed staring into space. She shows no interest in the baby, which is strange because when she stumbled in here a couple months ago, ailing and pregnant, everything was all about that damn baby. Allison was so afraid she'd miscarry. But now that Alicia's actually here, nothing. Allison barely holds her, doesn't talk to her. It's like pulling teeth to get her to nurse. I swear if I hadn't hired extra help. Dr. Ruby frowned again. I'd voiced similar complaints before. Did you call Pat Lundgren? He asked. I put in a good word for you. Thank you, and I did. Dr. Patrice Lundgren was a psychiatrist whose practice focused on new mothers. She was the Crescent's foremost authority on postpartum depression. I'd made an appointment and shelled out a hefty premium for a home visit, only to have Allison barely say boo to her when she came. I gather from the look on your face things didn't go well. I scoffed. That's an understatement. He tried in vain to tame his hair. If she won't speak with Pat, what makes you think she will talk to me? Because she looks up to you. I lowered my eyes. At least she used to. Uncle sighed. Allison hasn't spoken to me in several years. Well, I knew all about that. Lillian Ruby and my sister had been on the outs ever since Hurricane Collie and the Dog Day Massacre. Collie was a monster storm, and the board knew well in advance it had the potential to flatten a good part of the outside, especially the poorer outer zones. They also knew there weren't enough storm shelters for everyone, so Allison made a motion that we open up shelter space in the dome since we had plenty. Uncle Lillian seconded her motion, and you'd think the board would have voted to ensure that happened. Instead, they callously voted no. The majority saw the storm as an excellent opportunity to thin the herd. I'm not kidding. Someone actually said that, out loud, with their full chest. Frustrated, Allison paid someone to hack the codes to the east gate so she could open the shelters on her own. Thing was, by the time she got the gate open, it was less than 24 hours before Collie was forecasted to make landfall. The storm's outer bands were already lashing the Crescent, and rain was falling in sheets. Folks were desperate, and there was a stampede. A couple dozen got trampled to death, and 7 more were injured. Allison meant her grand gesture to be an act of mercy, but she was young and impulsive, and everything went horribly wrong. As soon as it was discovered she was responsible for the unauthorized opening of the gate, the board had her detained and sought to banish her from the dome forever. During a meeting which lasted several hours, Allison fought valiantly to defend herself. While Uncle Lillian agreed Allison should be disciplined, he thought banishment was too harsh, and argued as such, but he couldn't completely sway the board. In the end, the board opted for a 2-year banishment. I had to recuse myself because I was Allison's sister. Lillian voted, but I'm not sure how. The choices were either a 2-year banishment or nothing at all, and he didn't agree with either choice. I think Allison hoped Uncle Lillian would pull rank and overrule the board to save her. Technically, he could have done it. Even though he wasn't chairman, he was by far the wealthiest baron in the Crescent, and that gave him a certain cachet. If he had decided to throw his weight around, I bet the board would have grumpily complied. But that wasn't who Dr. Ruby was. He was wealthy, but not ruthless. Besides, he'd quietly built extra shelter capacity, outside no one on the board knew about, while other board members collected yachts and private planes with their excess credits. Dr. Ruby secretly rehabbed the outside. So while the Dog Day massacre was a tragedy, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Allison barely speaks to anyone anymore, I said, but she's always had a special connection with you. Sadly, that connection may be frayed beyond repair, said Dr. Ruby. Maybe, I said, my voice cracking. But for Alicia's sake, for my sake, would you please try? Okay, he thought to me, which was odd. I knew Uncle had the sight, Allison did too, but normally he didn't make a habit of throwing thoughts in my head because he knew my gift was weak. He must have been truly exhausted. I suppose I should have been thankful he hadn't sent the thought in Mandarin. Do you have anything to drink? He asked aloud. Preferably something with ample caffeine, because if I'm going to attempt the impossible, I at least need to be awake. So, he really was going to help me. Immediately, I relaxed, and I'm sure my relief was written all over my face. Follow me to the kitchen, I said, and I'll whip up something for you. After he practically inhaled a steaming mug of freshly brewed black coffee, Uncle and I made our way to Allison's suite. Before we entered Allison's bedroom proper, we checked the nursery. Alicia was swaddled in her crib and sleeping comfortably, while the night nanny read in her recliner. All was well. We found Allison sitting up in bed, drawing intently in one of her many sketchbooks. That was an improvement. At least she was doing something semi-productive. Usually she sat catatonic with her back against the headboard. Allison, I announced gently, Uncle Lillian's here to see you. At first she ignored us, but eventually she lifted her head, gave us a cursory glance, and scowled. So, Etta, she said, did you call Uncle Lily here so he could yell at me too? Luckily, Uncle jumped in before I could say something snide. No, she called me because she's worried about you. There's nothing to worry about, Allison haughtily insisted. I'm alive. That I can see, Uncle acknowledged. And you're drawing. Allison just shrugged. Yep. Then she went back to her sketchbook. Then Uncle asked, did Reginald ever give you the note I sent? Allison stopped drawing immediately. His query caught her off guard. And, I have to admit, it surprised me too. I knew perfectly well who Reginald was. He was one of the many paramours Allison had on the outside. But I had no idea Uncle also knew, or that he had tried to contact Allison through him. What note? Allison asked. Dr. Ruby helped himself to a seat. Just before your banishment was about to end, I sent you a note. An invitation, really, by way of Reginald. I never got it. Probably because Reginald and I haven't spoken in ages. He mentioned something about you two fighting when I met him at Christie's. Allison crinkled her brow. You met with Reginald? Have you been stalking me? Uncle allowed himself the faintest wisp of a smile. No, Allison, I simply care about you. So when I'm in region, I ask around. That's mighty sweet of you, Allison, said with no small amount of snark. Uncle glanced at me. Etta, may Allison and I have the room? Yeah, I replied. Of course. I mean, I was disappointed, but it made sense. My presence was gunking up the works. But Uncle's subtle dismissal triggered old childhood jealousies. Of the two of us, Allison had always been his favorite. Probably because she reminded him of himself as a child, too gifted and strange to ever be at ease in this world. I turned to leave. I'll be in Dad's old study, I said on the way out. When I got to the study, I sat at Dad's old desk and flicked on the security monitor. I tried to convince myself I was only keeping watch over my niece and not spying on my sister, but really, I was doing a little of both. At least I turned the sound off so I couldn't hear what they were saying. But if Allison suspected I was eavesdropping, which she probably did, she wouldn't speak out loud anyway. She and Uncle Lillian were both strong enough to volley thoughts back and forth, even without touch. They rarely did it in front of me, because that was rude. But back when Allison was a little girl just coming into her power, they often communed that way when they were alone. But as far as I could see, they weren't doing much of anything except staring each other down. Allison had moved to the edge of the bed facing Uncle, her face betraying little, if any, emotion. Uncle Lillian leaned back in his chair, casually fiddling with his helmet. His face was equally hard to decipher. Alicia was still asleep. It had been a long, brutal day, and it looked like it was shaping up to be an equally long and brutal night. My father, the late Vincent Flowers, knew something was different about Allison from the moment she was born. Most babies are born looking fairly generic, but Allison, with her milky porcelain skin, large and alert lavender eyes, and full head of curly ice blonde hair, was almost the spitting image of our mother. When she grew up, Allison would dye and straighten her hair precisely so she wouldn't look like her. Our mother, Vera Flowers, born Vera Prashenko, most definitely had the sight. To this day, I have no idea how strong she was. Most of the time, she cloaked her abilities because she grew up thinking they were sinful and they made others nervous. Eventually, that constant cloaking strained her mental health to the breaking point, and she suffered a complete psychotic break just before Allison's first birthday. My father sent her away to a swank facility up in Liberty City Dome, and she came back supposedly cured after a few months, only to have to return barely a month later. This cycle repeated a couple more times until Dad finally gave up and sent her away for good. To his credit, he never divorced her and always paid for the best care. He did have affairs and sometimes hired escorts to relieve the pressure, but he never brought any women home for our approval. For all practical purposes, Dad was a single father, and Mom had almost no part in our lives. Allison came into her power at the ripe old age of 7.5. A few weeks after she goaded and shamed me into taking an illicit trip outside with her on the public ferry because she wanted to see the real outside as opposed to the censored version we saw in videos. She specifically longed to see the colorful graffiti that festooned the tar pit wall in the upper 9th zone, since she'd already demonstrated prodigious artistic talent and found the street art fascinating. I was 9 at the time, almost 10, and I'd never been outside on my own, nor had I ridden the public ferry. But Allison raised such a ruckus about it that she finally convinced me to take the trip, if only to get her to leave me alone. It was an elaborate undertaking. I had to sneak our Haas suits out to a locker in the Dome ferry port since the nanny would have gotten suspicious if we had left the house geared up. I had to sneak the suits in pieces, so the process took several days. Then, a couple days later, I announced I was taking Allison to the Dome Aquarium and Gardens, since that was one of the few places Dad would allow us to go on our own. You could spend all day at the aquarium, which would give us enough time to sneak off to the upper 9th and back. We'd change at the ferry port, hop on the ferry, and head to the upper 9th to see the wall. Unfortunately, it was a high mist day, and visibility was next to zero when we embarked on our grand adventure, and the ferry moved slower than molasses. We never made it to the tar pit wall and the upper 9th. We rode the ferry until the lower 6th, disembarked, walked around for an hour or so, and boarded the dome-bound ferry back home. That brief excursion to the great outside convinced me I never wanted to grace the outside again, unless I absolutely had to. It was hot as blazes, even with the climate control in my suit, and the air, even filtered, was noxious and thick enough to chew. The people all looked poor, desperate, and afraid. Allison, however, was thoroughly enchanted and fell in love. She reveled in all the strange colors and smells. She was fascinated by all the crazy gear people wore. You hardly ever saw people geared up in the dome. She was particularly captivated by a tattoo parlor close to the ferry stop. They had a huge display window in the front where you could stop and observe the artist at work. A woman was in the process of getting angel's wings tattooed on her back. "I'm gonna get myself some wings someday," Allison announced. "Over Dad's dead body," I grumbled. Our jaunt lasted barely half a day, but that was long enough for us to catch the worst flu I've had in my life. Allison and I had gotten our shots, but they offered little protection to the dominant strain floating around outside. I was sick as a dog for a week, but I got better. Allison didn't. I seriously thought she was going to die. Dad was so angry. "What the hell were you thinking, Etta? Wandering around in that cesspool by yourself? And why would you drag your little sister with you?" "It was her idea," I whined. "She wanted to go." "Etta, you're the oldest. You're supposed to watch out for her. You're supposed to have more sense." One morning, Dad went into Allison's room to check on her and found her barely breathing and unresponsive. He called the doctor, and the doctor came, took one look, and said, "Call a priest." My sister actually received last rites. The next morning, she was up before sunrise like nothing had happened, like she'd never even been sick, puttering around in the kitchen, trying to mix up a batch of pancakes, and making an unholy mess instead. Dad and the cook nearly died standing up when they caught her. "Allison," Dad demanded, "what the absolute hell? He scooped her up in his arms, felt her head for fever. Nothing. He burst into tears. It was probably the only time I saw him cry. Allison, darling, he sighed with relief. You're all better. Yeah, Daddy, she said. I told those evil little beasties inside me to leave me alone and they did. I'm okay now. They're gone. Later that day, the doctor stopped by, examined her, and gave my sister a clean bill of health. Allison told him the same story about the evil little beasties. He laughed nervously. You have an excellent imagination, he said. That's when Dad called Dr. Ruby, who just joined the board. There was a rumor going around that Dr. Ruby had the site. Dad suspected it was much more than a rumor. Dr. Ruby's father, Abram Ruby, had been a supervisor on one of Dad's offshore mining operations until he succumbed to an environmental cancer. Dad knew Abram Ruby had the gift, and Dad knew the gift ran in families. Dad also sought to befriend Uncle Lillian for other reasons. My father had been Crescent's chairman of the board for as long as I could remember. He was the Crescent's wealthiest baron by far, and his fortune was the oldest. But Lillian Ruby, even though he was the newest board member, was the one person who had the potential to unseat him. He was a prodigy, the boy wonder of the bayou. His company Ruby Biotech was growing exponentially, and because he hailed from the deep outside, he was a bit of a hometown hero. Keep your friends close and your potential rivals and enemies closer. Dr. Ruby came and spoke to Allison about her evil little beasties, confirmed she had the gift, and predicted she would grow up to be exceptionally strong. Can you teach her how to use it? Dad asked, so that she doesn't go crazy. Uncle raised an eyebrow. Like your wife? Dad was flabbergasted. How do you know about that? Uncle only smiled. Vincent, your fear carries. I didn't even have to read you to know. So, will you help my daughter? Sure, Dr. Ruby said, as long as you keep my gift a secret. I'm not sure if Uncle made Dad sign an NDA or not. Uncle was extremely zealous about his privacy, even more so than Dad. At any rate, Allison and I started visiting Dr. Ruby's place in the second zone on a regular basis. He and Allison would spend some time alone while I played with the antique microscope and old glass slides Uncle kept in his study. Afterwards, he'd take us to the sixth zone library to grab books, and then he'd fix us dinner, which he always cooked himself. I always looked forward to those visits. Uncle was gentle, kind, and funny. Not like Dad at all. Allison grew to love the outside, enough to think of it as a second home, whereas I could take it or leave it. Outsiders positively adored her art. They also weren't as freaked out by her sightly gifts. Dad recognized Allison's talent, but he didn't feel art was a serious vocation, and wouldn't let her major in art in school. Allison eventually started sneaking outside on her own and made real friends out there. When she hit puberty, she developed an appetite for outsider bad boys, which Dad tried to nip in the bud, but he was unsuccessful. Allison also volunteered with the New Catholic Charities and later established the Dome Youth Volunteer Corps to advocate for better conditions on the outside, especially in the poorer outer zones. After Dad passed away and we both took over his seat on the board, she fiercely advocated for the outside to everyone's annoyance, but she also managed to get stuff done. Allison opened the East Gate because she actually knew and loved people on the outside, and she didn't want them to perish due to lack of shelter space, especially since the dome had a surplus. But few on the board could understand that. Most board members seldom ventured out of Crescent Dome, unless, of course, they had business in another dome elsewhere. For them, outsiders were little more than a source of cheap labor, cheap and eminently replaceable. I checked the monitor again. Alicia was still sleeping, and the night nanny had dozed off too, with her open book lying face down in her lap. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, my sister and Uncle Lillian were more animated. Allison had actually gotten out of bed and was standing up, gesticulating wildly, her hands aggressively slicing the air. Uncle sat staring daggers at her with his arms crossed as jaw tight. It was apparent they were arguing, but once again, I resisted the temptation to turn up the volume. Allison, excuse my French, looked like shit. The pregnancy had whittled her down to nothing. My sister had always been petite, a luminously pale spitfire, but now she was tenuous as smoke, save for her improbably large breasts, which miraculously always had milk to spare, when, and if, Allison could be persuaded to give it. I guess you could say Allison treated her newborn daughter like she treated her art. There was always tremendous care and affection during the process of creation, but once the piece was complete, Allison discarded her finished work like a snake shedding its skin, quickly moving on to the next shiny thing. Except in Alicia's case, there seemed to be no thing shiny enough to hold my sister's interest. The daily grind of motherhood didn't inspire her. I got the feeling Allison saw Alicia's mere existence as the capstone of her life's work. As far as she was concerned, her passion and responsibility ended the moment Alicia was born. Around 2 a.m., an alarm startled me awake. Funny, I had no idea I'd been asleep. I willed my eyes to focus as I checked the monitor. I'd drifted off for barely an hour, and within that brief sliver of time, a small hell had broken loose. The nanny was in the nursery struggling to change Alicia's diaper, but Alicia, beet red, clenched fists and wailing, just wasn't having it. Meanwhile, in the bedroom proper, my sister was having what appeared to be a seizure, and poor Uncle Lillian was doing his best to keep her from injuring herself. As far as I knew, Allison had never had a seizure before. I sprinted to the suite as fast as I could. But by the time I arrived, the emergency was waning. The nanny had managed to get the diaper changed, although Alicia was still screaming bloody murder. "I don't know what happened, Ms. Etta," the nanny nervously explained, while trying her damnedest to soothe the screaming baby in her arms. First Ms. Allison fell out, and then Ms. Alicia woke up screaming. I continued on to the bedroom to find Allison and Uncle Lillian both on the floor. Allison was on her back, her eyes wild and unfocused, her body trembling and drenched in sweat. She made guttural animal noises and seemed to be dangling at the edge of consciousness. Her head was cradled in Uncle's lap and he was stroking her forehead. "What happened?" I asked. "She's having a seizure," Uncle replied. His voice was strangely calm, bordering on serene, like maybe this was something he expected. "She's settling down now. Is there anything I need to do?" Uncle brought 2 fingers to his lips and whispered, "Wait." So I sat on the floor and waited. Lillian continued to stroke my sister's forehead. Gradually she stopped shaking and closed her eyes. That's when Alicia finally stopped crying. "What happened?" I asked again. Allison and I were talking when suddenly her eyes went wide and she began seizing. "What's happening now?" "The seizure is subsiding. She'll be out of it for a while. Do you want me to get someone to help her back in bed?" Uncle shook his head. "No, let her rest here for now." "You don't mind?" "No, I don't mind." We sat in silence for a long while. I watched as Uncle tenderly stroked Allison's forehead and hair. Meanwhile, the nanny paced back and forth with Alicia in her arms. Suddenly, Uncle Lillian asked, "How much do you know about your sister's life during exile?" "I know she left a trail of broken hearts, some of whom have tried to extort me." That surprised him. "Who?" "That Reginald Victory fellow. He claims to be Alicia's father." "Is that true?" "Unfortunately, it is. And I'm paying him a substantial amount of untraceables to keep quiet about it." "Did you also know Allison was mainlining Blue Sky?" I swallowed hard, then shook my head. That was news to me. It also didn't make one lick of sense. Blue Sky was a synthetic empathic, those with the sight sometimes used to augment their powers. But someone as strong as my sister would have no need for such augmentation. In fact, if she tried to signal boost herself too much, she risked permanent damage. "Why would she even do that?" I asked, dumbfounded. "I'm not sure," Uncle replied. "It may have had something to do with her art. Have you ever seen her Bleeding Lily mural on the tar pit wall?" I scoffed and rolled my eyes. "Lillian, you know I don't venture that deep outside unless I absolutely have to. You should check it out sometime. It's a stunning piece of work. I'm not going to gear up and prance around in the muck just to look at some random graffiti, even if it is Allison's." "Then it's your loss," Uncle said dismissively. "The Bleeding Lily represents Allison at the peak of her powers." "What does that have to do with her mainlining Blue Sky?" "Because the Bleeding Lily is more than mere graffiti. It's a slice of Allison's soul, her desperate apology to the deep outside." The Dog Day Massacre deaths tore at her core. "As well they should," I snapped. "She shouldn't have opened the gate. Did the deep outside accept your apology?" Uncle didn't seem to approve of my unforgiving attitude. But he wasn't the one forced to spend a decent chunk of their inheritance on a compensation fund for the victims. That loss of net worth cost our family the chairmanship. Allison might not have cared one iota about that, but I did. It was a question of honor. "Etta," he insisted, "you really should visit the Lily in person, run your hand along the paint, and feel your sister's pain." Then I think you might understand her better. That chance that would happen. Gannett, Lillian, I'm not like you. When I touch things, they don't speak to me. I think they speak more than you know. You didn't answer my question. Did the deep outside accept my sister's so-called apology? Uncle absently fingered one of Allison's curls. I know this might surprise you, but outsiders don't blame Allison for the massacre. They know she acted as an ally, and that she defied the board. They blame the rest of the board for voting not to open the gate in the first place. Well, it doesn't matter who they blame, does it? We can't change what happened. Uncle's expression suddenly became very grave. The bleeding lily isn't just an apology. It's also a spell for vengeance. I laughed nervously. I thought you didn't believe in that spell shit. Uncle shrugged. I don't believe in the woo-woo nonsense cast by posers, but you should know your sister is no poser. Allison has an exceptionally strong will. So you say. Then he added, I sense Alicia is part of that spell. At the mention of Alicia's name, the nanny stopped pacing. Lillian, now you're scaring me. Is this what you and Allison have been arguing about all night? No, he replied, glancing down at my semi-conscious sibling. This is what I'm reading from her now. I didn't know whether to believe him or not. I thought you taught Allison never to deep-read anyone without their express permission. She's barely conscious. She can't consent. Uncle was unapologetic. I also taught your sister to never lie to me. Just then Allison's eyes fluttered open. I wondered how much she had heard. She sat up slowly, trying to get her bearings. How did I get on the floor? She croaked. You had a seizure, Uncle Lillian explained. Is Alicia okay? Allison asked. That struck me as odd. She sounded genuinely concerned, when most of the time she acted like she couldn't care less about the child. Had the seizure somehow kick-started her motherly instinct? Yes, Miss Allison, the nanny replied. She's fine. Does she need anything from me? Is she hungry? No, miss. She just needed a diaper change. I was just about to put her back in her bassinet. My sister glanced at me, then Uncle Lillian. Can somebody help me into bed? I'm tired. Lillian immediately stood. A little help, please, Miss Etta? Sure. Together we carried my sister to her bed and tucked her in, even though we didn't need two people. Allison weighed less than nothing. She was asleep almost as soon as her head hit the pillow. We watched Allison sleep for a while to make sure she was stable, then we went to the kitchen and sat in the breakfast nook. More coffee? I asked. Uncle shook his head. No, thank you. I'm buzzing as it is. But do you have any smoke? I chuckled. Not the kind you like, I replied. I've just got some of Dad's old cigars. He pulled a face. No thank you. How about some water then? I grabbed a glass and poured some water from the fridge, then sat at the table across from him. Do you think Allison is going to be okay? I asked. If she wants to be, yes. What's that supposed to mean? She seems to think her work on this side of the veil is done. Do you think she's a danger to herself? Do I need to put her on some sort of suicide watch? Uncle considered it. No. I think she's precisely where she wants to be. I huffed in frustration. Uncle, you're speaking in riddles. Then he said something completely off topic. You know, Miss Etta, I actually met your mother once. I was flabbergasted. I knew Dad visited Mom at least twice a year until she died. He flew to Liberty City for her birthday and their anniversary. In the beginning, he used to take me and Allison along with him. But as soon as it became obvious Mom's condition would never improve, he made the pilgrimage alone. Mom never looked sick when we visited her. With her elegant designer clothes, meticulously applied makeup, and perfect hair, she was by far the most stylish patient in that facility. Dad made certain the staff never compromised Mom's physical dignity. But even though she made have looked like a movie star, even as a child I could sense how broken she was. She rarely spoke, and treated us with a hazy indifference. That is, when she could remember who we were. I couldn't tell you if her behavior was due to her illness or her treatment, but I do know how harrowing it was to witness. I used to have nightmares of growing up to be like her. I was convinced I was cursed. After several traumatic visits, Dad stopped making me and Allison go. Soon Mom became our dirty little secret, and we rarely spoke about her. The prying masses had a field day with their conspiracy theories concerning my mother's mysterious absence. Where is Vera Flowers? Or some variation was persistently trending clickbait, especially when the news cycle got slow. The top theories were, Dad had Mom murdered and dumped her body in the ocean, and Dad kept Mom locked away in a dungeon. And the wildest was, Mom never really existed, and Allison and I were boutique clones. When was this? I asked. I believe you had just gone to the London Free Zone for university, and Allison was starting her junior year in high school. Why would Dad take you there? Vera wanted to meet me. Oh, I felt a pang of jealousy. I thought Mom was too damaged and desolate to summon desire for anything, but apparently she had summoned enough to want to meet Lillian Ruby. How did the meeting go? Uncle's eyes got a faraway look. Strangely, I was stunned by how much Vera looked like Allison. Your mother was a little starstruck when she met me. She wanted me to sign her journal, so I did. Then she took my hands in hers and thought to me, "Thank you for helping Allison." So Dad must have told Mom you had the site. He broke your agreement. Perhaps. But despite her pharmaceutical haze, Vera was still strong enough to read me on her own. And game recognizes game. Did you read her? Yes, he replied. And she read a lot like Allison does now. There was a deep sense of loss and resignation. Her soul asked mine, "How did you not let it crush you?" I gather she was referring to your gift? Uncle nodded. So how did you answer? I told her my whole family has the sight, and they taught me to take it in stride. It doesn't make you a god, nor does it make you a demon. It just gives you a little more data to work with. So what was Mom's reaction? She thought to me, I wish my parents had said the same to me. Then she sent a tsunami of guilt and regret. Honestly, it was so raw, I winced. Uncle slid his glass of water aside, then reached across the table to take my hands in his own. His gaze was unflinching. Etta, your sister is not long for this world. I suggest you swallow your pettiness and make your peace. Needless to say, I was stunned. Why are you saying this? Is it because of the seizure? Not really. Except for a mild case of anemia, Allison is physically fine, but her soul is beyond exhausted. She's sick of the struggle and feels her life has served its purpose. I could feel myself panicking. But what about Alicia? Does Allison have her affairs in order? Of course she does. Dad drilled that into us. Be prepared. Tend to your business. Then you can rest assured you and Alicia will be provided for. And with that, Uncle stood and then proceeded to head to the mudroom to retrieve his boots. I scrambled after him. Do you think I should call the doctor about the seizure? I asked. Sure, Uncle Lillian replied as he donned his boots. But what I said still holds. Can't I convince Allison to stay? I pleaded. Sure, you can try, but her soul is made up. Where are you going? Home to bed. David's shuttle should be in from Pacific Coast and we'll be on the same continent for 3 whole weeks. I plan to thoroughly enjoy our time together. After that, he stood, leaned over, and planted a kiss on my forehead. He hadn't done that since I was 12. Tell Uncle gave it high, I said. He offered a faint smile. Don't worry, I will. Good night and stay strong, Miss Etta. Things are about to get interesting. And with that ominous benediction, he was out the door. Lillian Ruby's warning wasn't wrong. In less than a month, my sister was dead.
Professional audiobooks in a click. Spoken.